I never thought a sheet of paper could change the way I saw my family. But there it was, sitting on the kitchen table, 2 days after they left without me, a neat itinerary in Julia's handwriting, outlining every hour of the trip I was supposed to be on. I stood in the doorway, backpack still packed, staring at the list of places and times, my name scribbled in the margin like an afterthought. The silence in the house pressed in, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing outside. I picked up the itinerary, my hands trembling just enough to make the paper flutter. Julia had always been the organized one, the planner, the person who made sure nothing was forgotten. Except this time, it was me who had been left behind. It started with a misunderstanding. I thought we were leaving on Thursday. They thought it was Tuesday. I'd been at a friend's house, phone on silent, oblivious to the frantic calls and messages piling up. By the time I realized, the house was empty, their cars gone, my suitcase still by the door. I tried calling, but the reception where they were going was spotty. The first night alone, I convinced myself it was just a mistake, that they'd come back for me. But they didn't. Instead, I woke up to the same silence, the same emptiness, and now, the itinerary proof that the trip was happening without me. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the route with my finger. Julia had planned everything: breakfast at a roadside cafe, a hike in the hills, dinner at a tiny restaurant she'd found online. My name appeared in parentheses next to activities she thought I'd like. It stung. I imagined them laughing. In the car, music playing, Julia checking her list, my parents asking where I was, and then realizing too late. Or maybe they hadn't noticed at all. That thought hurt most of all. I tried to distract myself, but everything in the house reminded me of them. The mugs with their initials, the shoes by the door, Julia's favorite scarf draped over a chair. I wandered from room to room, hoping for a message, a missed call, anything. Nothing came. I told myself not to cry, but the tears came anyway, hot and silent. I wiped them away and stared at the itinerary, wondering what they were doing at that exact moment. Were they thinking about me? Did they feel guilty? Or were they too caught up in the excitement to notice my absence? The hours dragged on. I made myself breakfast, ate in silence, washed the dishes. I checked my phone again and again, but the screen stayed blank. I thought about calling Julia, but what would I say? That I was angry, hurt, that I felt invisible. I didn't want to sound pathetic. I wanted to sound strong, unaffected, but the truth was, I felt small and forgotten. By afternoon, I started to feel something else: resentment. How could they leave without me? How could Julia, of all people, not double-check? I replayed every conversation from the past week, searching for clues. Had I missed something? Had they? The more I thought about it, the more the anger grew, mixing with the sadness, until I didn't know which was stronger. I decided to go for a walk, needing to get out of the house, away from the reminders. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with the scent of summer. I passed neighbors who waved, unaware of the storm inside me. I wanted to scream, to tell someone what had happened, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I walked faster, my footsteps echoing on the pavement, the itinerary folded in my pocket like a secret. When I got back, the house felt even emptier. I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in my mind. I thought about Julia and my parents, about the trip I was missing, about the places I'd never see. I wondered if they were missing me, if they felt the same ache I did, or maybe they were relieved, happy for the peace and quiet. The thought made me laugh, a bitter sound that filled the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the distant bark of a dog. I thought about the itinerary, about the places I was supposed to be, the memories I was supposed to make. I felt cheated, robbed of something I couldn't name. But beneath the anger and sadness, a new feeling began to grow: determination. If they could forget me, maybe I needed to remember myself. Maybe this was my chance to figure out who I was without them. As the hours slipped by, I made a decision. I would follow the itinerary, not to catch up with them, but to reclaim the trip for myself. I would visit the places Julia had chosen, eat at the cafes, walk the trails. I would make my own memories on my own terms. The idea scared me, but it also excited me. For the first time since they left, I felt a spark of hope that I got out of bed, found my backpack, and started packing. The house was still silent, but I didn't feel so alone anymore. Tomorrow, I would begin my own journey, and maybe, just maybe, I would find something I'd been missing all along. The morning after I made my decision, I woke before the alarm. The house still wrapped in its unnatural quiet. I stared at the ceiling, the itinerary on the pillow beside me, and wondered if Julia had ever imagined I'd be reading it alone. The ache of being left behind hadn't dulled overnight. Instead, it had settled deeper, a quiet heaviness that followed me through every room. I moved through the rituals of breakfast and getting dressed, my actions mechanical, as if I were trying to fill the space my family had left behind. I packed my backpack with the essentials wallet, phone, a bottle of water, and the itinerary, now creased and marked with my own notes. I hesitated at the door, keys in hand, and glanced back at the empty kitchen. For a moment, I considered calling Julia or my parents, but the words I needed were still tangled inside me. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and started walking toward the first place on Julia's list. The cafe was only a few blocks away, a small place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh bread drifting out onto the street. I ordered the breakfast Julia had circled: scrambled eggs and toast, black coffee, a slice of orange. I sat by the window, watching people come and go, their lives moving forward while mine felt paused. I imagined my family sitting at a table like this, laughing, Julia checking her list, my parents teasing each other. I wondered if they missed me or if the trip had simply closed over the gap. I'd left. I tried to focus on the food, but every bite tasted like absence. I pulled out the itinerary, tracing the next stop with my finger, the park. I paid the bill and left, the waitress's polite smile lingering in my mind. I walked the familiar streets, the city's rhythm unchanged by my private upheaval. At the park, I sat on a bench beneath a tree, the itinerary spread across my lap. Children played nearby, their shouts and laughter a reminder of simpler days. I remembered coming here with Julia, how she'd always insisted on feeding the ducks, how our parents would sit on the grass and talk quietly, thinking we couldn't hear. I stayed until the shadows grew longer, letting the noise and movement fill the emptiness inside me. I checked my phone, half hoping for a message, but the screen stayed blank. I thought about sending Julia a photo of the park, proof that I was following her plan. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to seem needy, didn't want to admit how much I wanted to be included. Even now, the next stop was the library. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books, searching for something to anchor me. I found a novel Julia had recommended and sat in a corner, losing myself in someone else's story for a while. When I finally left, the sky was darkening, the city lights flickering on one by one. I walked home slowly, the itinerary folded in my pocket, my steps echoing on the empty sidewalk. Back in the house, the silence felt heavier than ever. I made dinner, ate alone, washed the dishes. I replayed the day in my mind, every moment colored by the absence of my family. I wondered if Julia was thinking about me, if she regretted what had happened, or if she was too busy to notice. I tried to convince myself that I didn't care, that I was fine on my own, but the light tasted bitter. Before bed, I sat at the kitchen table, the itinerary open in front of me. I wrote my own notes in the margins, what I'd seen, how I'd felt, the things I wished I could say. It wasn't the trip I'd imagined, but it was mine now. I was determined to keep going, to follow Julia's plan, not because I wanted to prove anything to her or my parents, but because I needed to prove something to myself. As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I realized that the silence wasn't just emptiness. It was space to think, to feel, to figure out who I was when no one else was watching. And for the first time since they left, I didn't feel quite so lost. I woke up with a start, heart pounding, the memory of laughter echoing in my mind. It wasn't real, just a dream of the trip I should have been on. For a moment, I lay still, listening for any sign of life in the house, but only silence answered. The itinerary was still on my nightstand, creased and worn from being folded and unfolded, studied and resented. I stared at it, the neat handwriting now a reminder of everything I was missing. I tried to keep busy, filling the hours with chores I never volunteered for when the house was full. I cleaned the kitchen, organized the pantry, even dusted the shelves in the living room. But no matter how much I did, the emptiness lingered. Every room felt like a museum of our family, with traces of Julia and my parents everywhere. A half-finished puzzle, a forgotten coffee mug, a jacket draped over the banister. I picked up Julia's jacket, pressed it to my face, and for a second, I could almost smell her perfume. The ache in my chest grew sharper. I checked my phone again, scrolling through old messages. Nothing new. I typed out a message to Julia, then deleted it. What could I say that I hadn't already said in my mind 100 times? I missed you. Why did you leave me? Did you notice I wasn't there? The words felt childish, so I let them go. Instead, I opened the itinerary again, tracing the route they were following. According to the schedule, they were supposed to be visiting a museum today, one Julia had talked about for weeks. I imagined them walking through the exhibits, Julia pointing out her favorite pieces, my parents smiling, the three of them together. I wondered if they left space for me in their conversations, or if I had already faded from their thoughts. The loneliness pressed in, heavier than before. I tried to distract myself by calling a friend, but the conversation felt forced. I laughed at the right moments, pretended everything was fine, but inside, I was unraveling. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet, the weight of my isolation settling over me. I realized I was angry not just at Julia and my parents, but at myself for caring so much. I wanted to be strong, to prove I didn't need them, but every empty hour made that harder to believe. That by late afternoon, I couldn't sit still any longer. I grabbed my backpack and the itinerary and left the house, determined to do something, anything to break the cycle. I walked to the park where we used to go as a family, hoping the familiar sights would bring comfort. Instead, the memories stung. I watched other families, their laughter ringing out, and felt like an outsider in my own life. I sat on a bench, clutching the itinerary, and let the frustration wash over me. I thought about the last conversation I had with Julia before the trip. She had been distracted, packing and double-checking her lists, barely looking up when I asked if she needed help. I replayed every word, searching for a clue that this was coming, some hint that I'd be left behind. There was nothing, just a normal day, a normal goodbye, and then nothing. I wondered if she felt guilty. I wondered if she missed me at all. As the sun dipped lower, I made my way home, feeling more alone than ever. The house greeted me with its usual silence. I sat at the kitchen table, the itinerary spread out before me, and tried to make sense of everything. I realized I was searching for answers I might never get. Maybe Julia had made a mistake. Maybe my parents were just as confused as I was. Or maybe, for a moment, I really had been invisible. That night, I lay awake, thoughts spinning. I thought about calling them, about demanding an explanation, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't want to sound desperate. I wanted to understand, to forgive, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I promised myself I'd try again tomorrow. For now, all I could do was hold on to the hope that when they returned, we'd find a way to talk about what happened. Maybe then, the silence would finally break. I sat at the kitchen table, the itinerary spread out before me, every line now committed to memory. I had followed it for days, tracing Julia's plans as if each stop might bring me closer to understanding how I'd been. Forgotten. The ache of being left behind hadn't faded, it had shifted, settling into something sharper, more persistent. I wanted answers, but the silence from Julia and my parents was absolute. My phone remained stubbornly blank, each hour without a message, deepening the sense of distance between us. Restlessness drove me to action. I packed a small bag, grabbed the itinerary, and left the house. Locking the door with deliberate care, I walked the route Julia had mapped out, visiting the places she'd chosen for us. At the cafe, I ordered the breakfast she'd circled. In pen, sitting alone at a table for four, the waitress smiled politely, but I could see her curiosity. Why was I alone? I answered with a practiced smile, hiding the truth behind small talk. The food tasted like nothing. I finished it anyway, determined to complete the ritual. At the park, I sat on a bench and watched families pass by, their laughter drifting on. The air, I tried to imagine my own family here, Julia leading the way, my parents trailing behind. I wondered if they missed me, if they even noticed the empty seat at each stop. The resentment that had simmered inside me flared again. I wanted to call Julia, to demand an explanation, but the words felt heavy and useless. I gripped the itinerary tighter, the paper creasing beneath my fingers. The next stop was the museum. I wandered the halls, moving from exhibit to exhibit, trying to see what Julia had wanted us to see. I lingered in front of a painting she'd marked as a favorite, searching for meaning in the colors and shapes. I imagined her standing beside me, explaining why it mattered. The silence pressed in, louder than any voice. I realized I was searching for her approval, even now. Even after being left behind. As the day wore on, exhaustion set in. I returned. Home, the house as empty as when I'd left. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the floor. Back against the wall, the anger had burned itself out, leaving only a dull ache. I thought about Julia, about my parents, about the trip that had gone on without me. I wondered if they felt my absence, or if I had simply disappeared from their world for a few days. I checked my phone one last time. Still nothing. I scrolled through old photos, searching for proof that I belonged with them. Each image was a reminder of what I'd lost, not just the trip, but the certainty that I mattered. I felt the urge to call, to break the silence, but fear held me back. What if they didn't answer? What if they did, and I heard nothing but regret in their voices? I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the itinerary on my chest. I realized I couldn't wait for them to reach out. If I wanted answers, I would have to ask for them. If I wanted to heal, I would have to start with myself. The thought scared me, but it also gave me something I hadn't felt in days, a sense of control. I decided that when they returned, I would speak. I would tell Julia how it felt to be forgotten, how it changed me. I would listen to her side, even if it hurt. I owed that to myself. As the first light crept through the window, I made a promise. I would not let the silence define me. I would not let absence become the only thing I remembered. Tomorrow, I would begin again, not as the one left behind, but as someone ready to be seen. The day my family returned, I heard the car before I saw them. I stood in the hallway, itinerary clutched in my hand, rehearsing what I needed to say. My heart thudded, not with anger anymore, but with a strange, raw anticipation. When Julia walked through the door, her eyes found mine. Instantly, she froze, suitcase in hand, as if she'd only just realized what she'd done. My parents followed, their faces drawn with travel fatigue and something else, regret, maybe, or uncertainty. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, a wall built from days of absence and questions left unasked. I wanted to break it, to demand an explanation, but the words tangled in my throat. Julia set her bag down and stepped forward. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were with us. I thought you'd answered my message." Her hands shook as she spoke, and I saw the guilt she carried, heavier than any suitcase. My parents tried to explain, each offering fragments of the story, missed calls, confusion, the chaos of last-minute packing. They said they'd realized too late, that they'd tried to reach me, that they'd argued about turning back. The words sounded thin, but I could see the truth in their faces. They hadn't meant to leave me, but they had. I listened, letting their apologies wash over me. The anger that had burned so fiercely was gone, replaced by something quieter. I told them how it felt to wake up in an empty house, to find the itinerary on the table, to follow their plans alone. I told Julia how her handwriting had kept me company, how every line felt like a question I couldn't answer. As I spoke, I saw her eyes fill with tears. We sat together at the kitchen table, the four of us, and for the first time we talked, not just about the trip, but about everything, the ways we'd failed each other, the things we'd left unsaid. Julia apologized again, her voice cracking. My parents listened, really listened, and I felt the distance between us shrink. In the days that followed, we tried to mend what had broken. It wasn't easy. There were awkward silences, moments when old hurts resurfaced, but there was also laughter, tentative at first, then real. We shared stories from the trip, and I shared my own how I'd visited the cafe, the park, the museum. How I'd learned to be alone without feeling abandoned. Julia gave me a new itinerary. Blank this time, for the next trip, she said. We'll plan it together. I smiled, realizing that something had changed in me. I wasn't the same person who had been left behind. I had learned to speak, to ask for what I needed, to forgive. As I lay in bed that night, the house no longer felt empty. The silence was different now, full of possibility, of second chances. I knew there would be other trips, other mistakes, but I also knew I wouldn't be invisible again. I had found my voice, and with it, a way back to my family,